After a successful decade run as a feature documentary, Eyes of the Mothman is now a podcast containing bonus information and, for the first time ever, the complete, unedited field interview tapes with eyewitnesses, experts, and those who were directly impacted by the Mothman incidents that occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966 and 1967. Although this podcast is meant to act as a historical record and an archive of the events that transpired, all material contained here is not for reproduction without the written consent by the copyright holder, Redline Studios, Incorporated. Episode 18 of Eyes of the Mothman, the podcast, brings us to an interview that I am proud of securing as a filmmaker. This is with Roy Cross. Roy Cross was Mary Hyre's editor at the newspaper. If you know the John Keel book, the name Mary Hyre obviously is going to ring a bell. She's a very prominent figure in the book. She's basically John Keel's kind of partner in crime, his connection to Point Pleasant, West Virginia. She was the local newspaper reporter that would report on Mothman, report on the UFOs, and that townspeople would come to and kind of divulge their own personal encounters and stories, very, very personal stories with her. And so, at the time of making this film, Mary Hyre had passed away. And so I had started to look for an alternative of someone who could maybe be interviewed that can speak to those interactions and those accounts of that journalistic reporting of the incidents locally. And so with Mary Hyre not being possible, I had found her editor. And he was kind of a character. For an older guy, he had some like small little quips and things that he would talk about. When he talked about Mothman, I think he was cynical, and I think he was kind of like, maybe as an editor should be, trying to find the truth behind all things. I remember him talking about the breaking of the first story of Mothman with Linda Scarberry and those involved. There were two couples who had witnessed the Mothman, the classic newspaper of, couples see Mothman in TNT plant area type headline. One thing that did not make the news print that Roy had told us was that when the couples went and reported their story, they were barely clothed. So basically they were out in a TNT plant, parking, making out when this thing had happened.
I think they were doing more than making out.
Well, we're giving the PG version for the podcast. But it's funny, he gave us that detail left out of many stories, I'm sure, out of, a courtesy to those involved. But I actually think it lends more credence to the story in that if I'm not going to go into a police station with a fabricated story and take all my clothes, like, you know what I mean? Like it kind of shows that they clearly witnessed something that traumatized them to where there was an immediacy of them leaving the area and going to the police right away. If they're still in shambles and half naked is essentially what Roy was telling us. I don't know if you remember that, but I thought it really added an interesting element to the original Mothman story that made me believe it a little bit more because, again, if I'm going to fabricate something, I don't know if I'm going to go to those lengths to set that up like that. This is 1966, right? And if you're thinking of like UFO stories back then, I would expect it to be, flying saucer, kind of almost hokey, but Roy would tell us about some of the stories that would come into the newspaper. And it's like, no, this was like a reptilian person with no lips who was, there were like...
it was a lipless woman is for what he said.
He said, but there were like abduction stories that were very much along the lines of like the film Communion with Christopher Walken. Remember that film? Where like, Christopher, which I think that is a really good comparison to some of the stuff that Roy was telling us. Very disturbing film and book if you haven't seen it. But it's very next level for that time and place. And I remember Roy would tell us some of these stories. Like these were not like, oh, I saw a silly flying saucer on a string on a tree. It was like, no, I was abducted and there were sexual things that were being reported to him with extraterrestrials. Like it got to a whole level that I know I was not expecting as a documentarian talking to this person about, UFO stories from the 1960s. They were very explicit, some of the things that he was telling us off camera.
What you have to think about when you're reporting this by journalists is that He's reporting that these people saw this. That's a true statement. That's a true story. He is saying that somebody said this. Yes, that doesn't mean it's real, doesn't mean it's accurate. But I think that when people see that, that's where you have to be careful. Okay, when did these stories come out? Are they coming out because they read it in the newspaper?
It's funny how, like, you look back then, right? 1966, main source of media and information is the newspaper. I mean, it's literally all there is. You know, I mean, there's this slice of television, but there's no social media, there's no internet. And so you're getting your stories through the newspaper. And you know, the newspaper was more valued back then. I mean, now the newspaper doesn't even exist. But one, you know, interesting comparison that we can kind of make, we're on the East Coast, you live in New York, I live in New Jersey now. You know, recently there was a wave of drone sightings in the news, right? When you look at how that started, it started with a few drone sightings, and then it grew. And then the government made statements they have no idea what it was. And then, you know, I know in our area, it was a hotbed of where drone sightings were out there. I personally don't believe I saw a single drone sighting, but, you know, you would go out looking for them. At some point with my kids, they're like, we want to go see the drones. So like, all right, we'll go out and drive around and look for them. And you find yourself driving around looking for drones in the sky. And at no point did we see anything that you could identify and go, that's definitely a drone. There's airplanes, there's other aircraft, there's other things. And then you start to just go, is everybody just misidentifying what they're seeing? You know, it starts with a story and then grows. And then I'm sure we do know that there were some credible drone stories, because now the government has later come out and revealed, like, yes, there was an operation done that they knew about. And of course they lied about it, which is very frustrating. But you just look at that and go, from witnessing that firsthand, there were definitely some credible things, but it was flooded with a lot of misidentified things.
Well, I think you have a time back then and now that you can't even possibly compare, because everybody has a video camera in their pocket, everybody. And everybody, if they see something, if they see drones, if they saw the Mothman today, if they did anything, they would instantly whip out their camera and start filming. So you would have not only eyewitness stuff, but you would have documented things that were going on, and then you could try to explain what you saw. But if you're dealing with the mid-late 60s, you're only dealing with eyewitness. Nobody's taken out a camera, especially at night in the woods. You're not even going to see anything, even if you did have a video camera on hand or a still camera or anything. So you have to rely on witness testimony for anything, eyewitness stuff. And the only media that you would be dealing with, unless they covered it on television, is, and you know, you're in Little West Virginia, is not like a hotbed of media types around. So you would have to deal with the newspaper. It's the only place that story, besides word of mouth, could possibly spread.
I had thought, you know, the bulk of what Roy was going to retell and recount was like, oh, you know, UFO in the distance. But these were just very specific stories that he remembered of people calling in about abduction stories and interactions with beings, which, again, that doesn't really make its presence so much in the Mothman story, with the exception of the Indrid Cold stories. But, you know, again, there's only so much time that you have to do all this. And so some of that was left out of the film, and we just didn't go too deep into those abduction type stories. But it does seem that some of that was going on out there, according to Roy and his remembrance of the stories that would come into Mary Hyre.
I liked Roy because he was very much a traditional reporter or like news guy, where he didn't really give you his opinion. He just kind of stated facts. So there was never a point when we were talking to him that I thought that he did believe what was happening or didn't believe what was happening. He was just very factual and very just like kind of traditional in that sense.
You know, he was not made his way into many other books or films related to Mothman. I don't think many people had the opportunity to speak with him. And so I appreciate the fact that we were able to get that. And I have good memories of Roy's interview. I remember we interviewed him at his home, out in his front yard. It's very peaceful and quiet. And he was a good interview, just by the book, matter of fact, and just told us what he remembered. And sometimes, you know, those simple interviews are some of the best ones when looking back on them and trying to remember a time and place, such as Point Pleasant in the 1960s. And hopefully Roy will give us a little bit of insight of what it was like to be the editor at the newspaper then, hearing some of these stories firsthand. Okay, to start, Mr. Cross, can you just tell me your name and spell it for me so I have it later?
Roy J. Cross. R-O-Y, initial J, Cross, C-R-O-S-S.
Great, thank you. So, Mr. Cross, can you tell me about Mary Hyre? Can you tell me about what she did as a profession? She used to be a writer for the Athens Messenger, right?
She was the Point Pleasant correspondent. The Messenger had out-of-town bureaus at that time. She handled Mason County and Point Pleasant as a reporter and anything else we wanted her to do.
And you worked with Mary, right? Can you tell me about your guys' working relationship?
Oh, well, she was my reporter. It's like my wife was my reporter in Wellston. And I was her editor. But we had a very easily going relationship. There was no trouble. She covered her beat, and I saw that she covered it and helped her on the stories.
And was Mary a good reporter? Can you tell me a little bit? Was she good at her job?
She was good. She was a good reporter. She was not a writer, and she knew it. And she didn't complain when we had to rewrite her copy. She kept her news objective. She didn't play favorites.
And was Mary a type of reporter that was very interested in the facts of the stories she was covering?
She was interested in the facts, and she was also well aware of the things that weren't obvious to the average person. She might think that you were going to open a new store, we'll say. She wants to know whose money's behind it. That's more interesting than what she's going to sell.
Right.
And she knew this sort of thing. She just siphoned it, absorbed it, all was going on, put a piece of this together and that together and come up with a story.
Yeah, there's a lot of like folklore and all that, things with the Mothman and all that stuff. Cornstalk. TNT plants, the Battle of Point Pleasant.
He's buried there among the courthouse.
Yeah.
They dig him up every now and then and move him.
Yeah. Now he's in a park, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was responsible for the 1937 flood of the Ohio River. That Point Pleasant didn't have that flood wall.
That's right, yeah.
And they got a little wet.
Yeah, they blame a lot of things on him. The fall of the bridge and all that stuff. Back to Mary Hyre. Can you tell me a little bit about what Mary, when she was working like in Point Pleasant, there was a lot of weird things going on that she was doing reporting on, like UFOs and the Mothman. Can you tell me about Mary? She had become like a person that people who were seeing strange things could come to and trust. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, they could listen to her, and she would listen to them and not argue with them. Just, yeah. And that's so. And they sensed her interest in what she might be bored to death. But she kept fishing. And every once in a while she'd land a big one. And the people, they would think, well, I can talk to Mary. And one incident that happened that how much they thought of her. During the Korean War and during all of our wars, when somebody was wounded or killed from the town, you got a telegram. And the Western Union telegram man would deliver to you and it'd say, we regret to inform you that your son, Joseph Smith, has been killed in action. Well, Mary had a tie-in with the telegraph office that as soon as they got a telegram like that, they'd let her know. And she would contact the family. And one day she got ahead of the telegraph man and got to the family home before they knew that their son had been killed. And Mary said, I didn't know what to do then. She said, so I just knocked on the door, and they said, well, what's the matter with you, Mary? She said, I hate to tell you this, but Johnny or Billy had been killed in action. I got the telegram. And the mother later told Mary, she said, we were so glad that it was you that had to tell us instead of the Western Union man who came in here from out of down in Worthington home. You knew our boy. It just softened the blow for him.
So she was someone, would you say, like someone in the community that everybody trusted? And so would you say that Mary was someone that was, viewed by the community that was trusted, and people weren't afraid to come to her to tell her anything, even some of these strange things that were happening to them?
Yes, she was definitely trusted. She wasn't liked by everyone because if something needed to be told, she told it. But the kids, the high school kids trusted. You talked to them, you didn't know she was ever married. She was Miss Hyre. The Ms. was covered Mrs. or Miss Mary. As if Ms. is a word. But she got scoops of little minor stories, but like their annual football homecoming, Mary knew who was the queen before the game because the kids trusted her. And the committee told Miss Hyre, who was like the queen, they weren't supposed to announce this to halftime of the ball game. It was a minor victory, but
Yeah. Okay.
But she, I've used to ask me, Mary, have you seen any flying saucers? She just smiled. She let the people see them. And they tell Mary, they said, you saw Mary? Did you tell me? Did you see it? And she told me one time, the Huntington newspapers sent a lady reporter up there'd been another sighting south of Point Pleasant. And there's a power plant down there. Goodyear has a plant. And this reporter from the Huntington Herald Dispatch came up and she saw Mary and said, will you show me where they see all this? I want to get a picture. So she took them south of town and waited. She said, well, I don't know that we'll have a sighting. They had one the other night. Several people saw it. So Mary said, we started to walk up, got out of the car and walked and shot pictures. She shot pictures about every 2 feet. She said, I just shot all over the place. When they developed the film, she had pictures of everything except the blank spot where they find this. Mary said, when we said, there it is, there's the saucer. And she took a picture, and when she developed the film, there was nothing on it.
Weird. Can you tell me, if you were going to describe Mary, how she was as a person and as a reporter, you were friends with her and you also worked with her. Give me like 3 words that would best describe Mary as a reporter and a person.
She understood. She understood that you were interested when you told her about this flying saucer. You were understood when your child came to you and told you, Mary.
Okay, you can start again. You can take a minute to think if you need.
I was just thinking of one she brought to meet me. She got a kid that she said could play the Flight of the Bumblebee on his piano, but only it's the Mothman. He saw the Mothman, and that's the noise he made. It was one of these kids' toy pianists, and he was running up and down his wheel up there, and that's what the Mothman sounds like. And Mary said, that's right. Well, I'm glad to find that out. Got his name in the paper that he'd seen the Mothman and played the Flight of the Bumblebee on his piano.
Mary did a lot of work with the Mothman. Do you remember when that was happening? Do you remember what were some of the reports that people were coming to Mary with?
Well, the one place, the Mothman was on Route 2 between Point Pleasant and Mason. But West Columbia's in there. And the TNT plant, which you may have encountered, where the beehive hills were still there. Well, that was a great area for romance. It had been abandoned with all this. You could drive through it in the middle of the night, nobody bother you. And lovers would get there with their six-pack of beer and enjoy the evening. Well, one night, this couple were enjoying the evening, and the Mothman arrived and frightened them. He got in the car and he took off, and at 70 miles an hour, the Mothman was right above his car all the way to Point Pleasant. And Mary said, he saw him all the way. She said, the fellow said they got up to 70 miles an hour, and they finally got away from him when the Mothman was right above the car all the way. She was holding her hand. We kept ahead of him all the way. And Mary says, I asked him, well, they got away from you? Were they naked? Well, she said, Mary, you shouldn't answer me that. Well, she said, were they? She said, yes.
That's funny. What did Mary think about all these kind of crazy stories, the Mothman and the UFOs? What did Mary think about that?
That's when I'd ask her if she saw them. I don't know. They're they're truthful people. You can trust them. She never would say, yes, I'm sure it was there, or he's just seeing things. But she would agree with them and leave them with the impression that she had no doubt that what they were saying was correct. She said, well, they saw it. I didn't. So they're telling the truth. As far as I'm concerned, they're telling the truth. Now, there was a man named John Keel. You recognize that name?
Yes.
Okay. He took Mary to New York or somewhere to appear on a program. She went along. She said she always wanted to go to New York. The Mothman might as well pay for it.
Yeah, I'd heard about that too. That he had taken her there.
He wrote a book or on UFOs or something. Anyhow, he lived off USOs for a few years. You notice we haven't found any lately.
Yeah, I know. It's been quiet for a while.
She never put the people down. If they saw it, Mary saw it.
Can you just tell me, a lot of people reported really strange things to Mary, strange things in town, like lights and in the sky and the Mothman. Can you tell me about some of these stories? Tell me some of the strange stories that were reported to Mary.
Well, one was a teenage boy. As I recall it, his father or his mother brought him to see Mary. And his story was that he'd been out walking at night, and this spacecraft sat down in a park there in Point Pleasant, Coble Park or something. And these space creatures got out of them, took him on board, didn't forcibly, you just told him to come with them. And when they got him on board, they had him have sex with a lipless woman. The fellows, he said he didn't have lips. And what else? I don't know, some other physical, but apparently they were going to breed. Mary said, now that was getting a little heavy for me. But the boys and his father, she said, she took their information, but she said she never figured out if they actually saw something or were trying to, because she said they just were, they had a good reputation for honesty and integrity and so forth. And Mary said, that's too much for me.
Can you tell me about some of the Mothman sightings that were reported to Mary? Just in general, as if you're telling me about Mary for the first time. Can you just tell me, like, what are some of the stories that Mary handled?
Well, the one I was telling you, the guy was driving 70 miles an hour down the road. And the state police would get calls at night that she said she always thought it was, in this case, something to keep disturbed. People would go around the TNT plant, drive through it, say they saw the Mothman. But I forget who, somebody had a drawing of what the Mothman was supposed to look like. She got opinions from people who would, in case you mentioned a hawk. Well, I suppose in the middle of the night, that hawk grew in size.
And can you can you just tell me again how Mary was viewed by the community? And if you could start your sentence with, Mary was viewed by the community.
Mary was viewed with respect and being party of her town. When people gave her a story, it was like giving it to a member of the family. But she didn't hold back. And I mean, when the prosecuting attorney.
Hold on 1 second. Let that motorcycle go by.
Oh, yeah.
So loud.
Yeah, he make them down the alley here. He's got one of them has a nest back here. He has to get.
Sounds like he's gone. Can you tell me, you were telling me about how Mary was viewed by the community and that she always told it how it was.
She didn't go out looking for trouble, but one of the public officials there, he just got caught with his hand in the till. And the family came to her, and, well, he's been a good boy and all this, but he still stole the money.
And you were Mary's boss, is that right?
Yeah.
How was she as an employee?
Very good. She took the directions, but she stayed, for instance, she was not a 8-hour day person. If the council was going to meet tonight, she'd be there. If she would come back in the evenings into the office, maybe stay 2 or 3 hours. They're visiting with people. People stop in and see her.
And even though Mary worked for the Athens Messenger, she did a lot of work in Point Pleasant. Can you tell me about that?
In what respect?
She was in Point Pleasant a lot, right? She had worked out of the courthouse there?
Yeah, the office was right across the street from the court. It was. It's not now.
Can you tell me about her working in Point Pleasant courthouse a lot?
Yeah, she was mother confessor in the courthouse. The girls would whisper the so-and-so's latest date or who we're putting up with or who's not doing their job. And Mary siphoned it just all and they took care of her. I was sitting in the office one day and we now make a business call, and a state trooper came out of the courthouse. And he walked across the street, right up in the harbor, opened the door and reached in and turned on the air conditioner. Good morning, Mary. Good morning. Miss Hyre, how are you this morning? Fine. I was you, trooper. I'm fine. Have a good day. And he left. And I says, what the hell was that? And she says, well, I can't reach that air conditioning unit. It's up too high. She says, so the boys at the state police post come over in the morning and turn it on. One of them turned off tonight. That's public service.
This podcast is a companion piece to the original feature-length documentary film from 2011 of the same title. If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to see the film that started it all by visiting www.eyesofthemothman.com.
You know, Mary reported on strange things, and she also had some strange things happen to her while reporting on it. Do you remember any of her talking about that at all?
Yeah, she had a case with a missing man, businessman, and he, as I said, he was missing. Several days went by and they couldn't find him, and they searched around the town. And Mary said, "I thought he's probably in the river. The Kanawha River flows in there at Point Pleasant." And she said they went up the river a little ways up toward Winfield, and they spotted a car down there and just barely sticking out. Well, this happened on a Saturday morning, and the Point Pleasant has a daily paper, did have. And Mary thought, if they find that car, they're going to beat me to it. She said, I told the record boy, pull your cable in, let's wait a while. Can you wait about 15 minutes? He said, well, the troopers wanted out of there. She went over to the trooper and she said, you don't need to rescue that car, the guy's in it, he's dead. Can you hang on for 15 minutes? And he said, what for, Mary? She said, the deadline on the register will be passed and we'll have the story. I said, do you mean they dropped your cable back in the river? She said, yeah, she said, he owed me. Odie owed me I said, what did he owe you? He said, never mind what he owed me, but he owed me. He said, we beat the little bastards, didn't we? Said, yes, we did.
I had read that people had reported to Mary things about the Mothman and things about weird lights in the skies, but also there were kind of like a lot of people having problems in their homes, like with their electronics, like with noises and just kind of things out of the ordinary. Do you remember that at all? Do you remember what type of like kind of, I guess, maybe unexplainable things that were being reported to Mary?
No, she never talked too much about that.
No? Okay. Do you remember the Mothman ones, though, aside from the first night sighting? There was quite a few, right? Quite a few reports that she had reported on in terms of the UFOs and just in general. In general, can you tell me about some of the weird things, like not specific stories, but just general terms, like if it's weird lights in the sky or flying Mothman? Tell me some generally strange things that kept being reported to Mary on a regular basis.
She got a lot of calls on the electric power plants down there. You know, there are 3. And she got a lot of calls, supposedly people seeing UFOs around those power plants. She pretty well thought somebody was fixing, as they say, they're fixing to do something on the power plants, blow them up.
Sure. Squirrel or something?
No.
Oh, there's nothing. Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Can you just tell me again? You're telling me about that a lot of people were reporting UFOs over the power plants.
They were reporting lights. They didn't necessarily say UFO, lights. And she said that she would see them all around the power plant. One of those power plants furnished power for the atomic energy at Piketon. And so Mary was looking more practical about something by zeroing in on we're in Korea and we're in with the Cold War, and she was looking for the enemy soldiers behind rather than UFOs.
So she took pretty practical, I guess, approach to some of these things.
Yeah, she'd. I just sent a reporter and photographer down there one time. They'd been seeing UFOs. And the two of them stopped at Gleckner's bar in Pomeroy before they got there. Mary said, "You got those two bums down here?" And she said, "I didn't see anything all night." They did all night. They came in the office. She said, "I couldn't get rid of them."
And can you tell me, Mary worked a lot out of the Point Pleasant courthouse. Can you tell me about, that she spent a lot of time there?
Well, of course, some of it was gathering news. But the other thing would be building fences. She got to know the people. She would know that your kid's got a good grade in school, or your son-in-law is promoted at the bank. All these little things that make your life better, she used to get her news. People would tell Mary the things that I told you, the high school kids who wanted to share their good fortune.
So her profession was more of a lifestyle then. She kind of was always working, getting to know people. Yeah. Can you tell me about that?
She, as I said, seldom she quit on after a 5-hour, 8-hour day. And there was a restaurant, Gene Ball's restaurant, was her favorite hangout. And they'd have Mary say, "I don't wonder who's going to buy my lunch tonight." I don't know. Her husband's name was Scotty, and I seldom saw him. I don't know where he stayed. Mary was a hefty person, and Scotty was a little skinny guy.
Yeah, I never read much about her.
Put it together pretty well, Tom and I.
I'll have to ask him about it. I have talked to him quite a bit. That would be good to have, because I am looking for, some articles and stuff when she used to report there.
She was active in her church,
right?
Episcopal Church there in Point Pleasant, very attractive. But I forget what the organization, but I know I was a pallbearer for her. And the Episcopalians have a very short burial prayer. You don't have to worry about a long funeral. And I thought about Mary, but she used to tell me, go to funerals, and she said, at least we don't keep them hanging there for an hour and a half like you Catholics.
I think just a few more questions, and I think I've gotten that. Can you tell me, a lot of people during 1966 and 1967 were seeing strange things and also kind of going through some weird experiences that were kind of unusual and they're difficult. But Mary Hyre had kind of become like a shoulder to lean on. She had become someone that people that had trust in, they had faith in. Can you just tell me a little bit about, in 1966 and 1967, there was a lot of strange things going on in Point Pleasant, but Mary had become someone that could be, someone that could be trusted to talk to about some of these things.
Well, she could be. She listened to everybody with what they had to say, and sometimes she would, if stories had been published in magazines, all that, Mary would refer you. When you come to her when you'd seen something at your farm, Mary would say, "Well, let me show you this clipping," or "Why don't you go down to the drugstore and buy this magazine?" And that might help you. She would pass the buck back and see. She wasn't going to say that she swore to me, though, that one fellow said he saw one in Phoenix or north of Phoenix. And she always did mention that, because she said he wouldn't have seen it. He wouldn't have been drunk. He wouldn't have been chasing anything. If he said he saw it, he said, "By God, there's been out there." And some pretty noteworthy people have sworn that we covered up the UFOs in that period, mostly in the Nevada, Mexico area. I never saw any flying saucers. I thought I saw one night, but I didn't.
Do you remember after the first big Mothman story was in the newspaper? I think the one that Mary had covered with the four kids that had saw it that one night.
Oh, I forgot
After
about
that,
that.
all of a bunch of it seemed like Point Pleasant was kind of a lot of media attention came there. There were reporters from New York, there were reporters from California that had come there to cover the story. Do you remember the change? Because Point Pleasant's a small, kind of
Yeah.
quiet town. Do you remember when all of the media attention happened? Can you tell me about that?
Well, the people of Point Pleasant were sort of accustomed to out-of-town newspapers coming in, particularly Huntington and Charleston, and their TV station, because they had some reason, things happened at Point Pleasant. You get floods.
Hold on one second. That car is really loud. Okay, so can you start again? You were saying that for some reasons things happen in Point Pleasant. Can you start from there?
They had big political frauds. They had fires. Right after the Silver Bridge went down, a big business district fire. The flood, of course, brought the 37 flood. Before that, they didn't have a flood wall. Well, after they got water clear up to their eyebrows, they built a flood wall. And the business, the river business boomed. They had a shipyard there. They built small destroyers on the Point Pleasant Marietta manufacturing lot,
And
which is a little, imagine a destroyer floating down the Ohio River. They put them up on balloon sort of things and float them. They couldn't do it. Doesn't matter. They run aground. But Point Pleasant is, trying to think of a word to describe it. The people bounce back, resilient. They have bad fires. They had floods. They had murdered. The police chief or the fire chief was murdered. There's always something. One Sunday, the Messenger had 3 front-page stories. They're all 3 from Point Pleasant. And that was what Mary was turned out.
is there anything that you think? Oh yeah, can you tell me about the Silver Bridge? When the Silver Bridge fell, Mary covered that story. Can you tell me about that?
It happened on her doorstep. The office, I said, was right across the street from the courthouse. And Mary had just leaving the office, 5 o'clock rush, and a state trooper named Odell was coming out of the other side. And they heard this rumble and noise, and Mary said, Jesus, right there goes the bridge. And she could see the lights going like it whipped her. Now the approach to that is covered up now. They got a little park, and you go across further down. But that was the main approach. They run right past our office. And she was there when the thing, she told me about, there was a woman, I didn't know her, but Mary did, had driven up on the approach to the bridge just before it was boom. She looked up. Mary said, there she was screaming. She was hysteric. She said, Odie and I said, well, God, the bridge is gone. And this woman could see her car hanging over the edge of where the bridge was. Mary had to get her quieted down. She said, I couldn't believe it. But so-and-so, whatever it was, said, boy, she lost it. And I said,
a lot of people thought that the bridge was related to the strange things that had happened, like
Mhm.
the UFOs and the lights and the Mothman. Can you tell me about that? That a lot of people thought the bridge was related to all of these things. And what did Mary think?
She never come out and said it, but I think she went back even as far as cornstalk. But that night she was ripping off the things that had happened to Point Pleasant. And I know she asked the questions and nobody could answer. Do you think this is a result of the UFOs flying over the town? Somebody from, well, who are you going to get to comment on it? She wrote her story, provided the information that what is the cause and who's going to investigate it. And everybody investigated it. They finally figured out what happened to it.
It's an eyebar.
An eyebar.
Is there anything about Mary that you think I forgot to say or that we should talk about before we stop? About Mary Hyre, just as a person, as a reporter? That's what I'm trying to do, is just talk about how she was as a person and the reporter and how people looked at her. Is there anything else that you think we should say?
You placed yourself in a position to encourage people. People, like high school kids, people come in and needed somebody to tell you, yeah, go ahead and do it, or why don't you? People would talk, sounding board to her. Well, what will it mean? It had nothing to do with the news. They just wanted to talk to Mary as an advisor.
And just one more time, can you just tell me how Mary was as a reporter and how people really trusted her and could go to her with these ridiculous stories and not feel embarrassed?
Well, she was a good reporter, accuracy, and she developed a little thing when she would be typing things. She wanted you to know it was okay on the teletype. She'd SQ in parentheses. Because maybe your name's Smith and it's SMYTHE. And then she would let the editor know that that was right. Don't change it. But she might send us a story and be some kid need to do something in school. She know that he's not having the home life that he needs. She told me one time, one guy was such a bum and he got killed. And Mary said to her, the son, she went to the funeral home and the son told her, I never got to know my father and he was never nice to me. Mary had to try to explain to him that if he got to heaven, he'd be nice to him. He said, boy, that was hard to do, you know. I said, well, it would have been. I would never had to try to do it. But they came to her. I, of course, was kidding her about it. I don't see any Roman collar on you.
I think that's all the questions I have. I have a question about the forecast. Sure.
I was told that somebody in the late 70s walked into the courthouse with explosive device.
I never heard that. Yeah. They could have, but I don't.
Nothing like that about 1977, 78? Were you at the newspaper at that point?
I'm trying to think. I went to Michigan for 2 years. In Lansing with the State Journal. But I never remember anything about them going into the courthouse with an explosive.
Do you remember there was one story that I had heard that there was one time when Mary was working in the courthouse and there was kind of a man that had come in and scared her, like a little man that had kind of made her feel uncomfortable and strange. Do you remember that story at all?
Vaguely, because it was a little man, and I think that was the case where Joe got out of hand. there was a small person, and they were trying to convince Mary it was somebody from one of the spaceships, one of the little people from the spaceships. But I don't think Mary fell for it.
Okay. Okay, I think that's everything. I asked you every question I had.
Whether you got anything worthwhile or not.
I definitely think so.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Eyes of the Mothman, the podcast. For more information about our program, or to find out where you can watch the original documentary film or purchase a limited edition signed DVD copy, please visit www.eyesofthemothman.com.